Can you hear me in the back okay? We're going to start the meeting here in just a couple minutes. The clock on the back of the wall is saying 7:30 almost, so if you want to find a way up to the front here, we got the slideshow obviously right behind me. The best seats in the house are going to be in the front 2 rows, but I never get any takers. I don't know why. I wonder. I showered. I think I'm good, but all right. Come on up this way, folks. We've got plenty of room up front. Okay, great, thank you. Well, welcome everyone. This is our third and final public meeting of the week. We've been traveling around the area, started up north of here and went south of here last night and had nice sized crowds at both of those meetings. But you guys are the winners by far. We've got double or maybe even triple the number of folks here tonight, and we thank you all for taking the time to come on out and hear what we have to say about our new feasibility study. My name is Kevin Bloom. I'll be the facilitator for tonight's meeting. Our meeting is going to be a very simple format and one that I hope will be informative for you. Before we start with details about our feasibility program, though, I would like to turn the floor over to David Ashley and have him give a few more comments about the parallel efforts that are happening in the basin as well. David.
Thank you very much, Kevin. Appreciate that introduction. Like you said, I'm David Ashley, Chairman of the Souris River Joint Board, for those of you who don't know me. We have a very important meeting tonight to go through, but before we get to that point, I want to just hit some highlights on I guess you'd call them parallel paths that we're going down through to reduce flood danger in the basin. And so we've identified those. And you get many offshoots from those, and there's other ones we may get into as we go down the line. But as we look at them, of course, we got the Mouse River Enhanced Flood Protection Project. We've got the plan of study that we're working through. We've got the National Disaster Resiliency HUD grant scenario that we've been working on, that has been worked on, as well as what we're here for tonight is the feasibility study. And that basically is exactly what it says. It's a feasibility study to determine if we can have a federal partner involved and to what degree that we'll have a federal involvement. And so your input on that part of that path this evening is very crucial. And shortly I'll turn it back over to Kevin and he'll have a presentation with the Corps folks on that. Mouse River Enhanced Flood Protection Project, just a real brief outline on where we're at with that right now, is we've got the first 3 phases in the city of Minot design completed and working towards the possibility of construction next year on those phases. There's been work done on the Perkett Ditch, drainage, water retention area, as well as the golf course realignment is completed, making way for the project. Also, the Minot and FEMA flood protection for the region-wide city water treatment plant is well under construction. That's a very vital part of the flood protection project as well. As well is the National Disaster Resiliency competition that Minot was very successful in, and we really have to look at that as one of the paths as well. Also, the plan of study. Now that involves getting our heads wrapped around reservoir management, water management throughout the basin, and that's an international in scope. There's a lot of preliminary work that's been done on that, and we're looking at, of course, as always, funding is a real crucial thing. It's funded part by Canadians, part by the United States. We're looking at the end of next year to possibly get really rolling on that one. And the reason we're here tonight is to discuss the feasibility of a federal partner. And that's very crucial. We've been working long and hard on that. And a couple questions that have been approached to me more than once. Here we are, 5 years after the flood. Why did it take so long? Well, simple answer to that question. It needed an act of Congress. Literally needed an act of Congress. And that act was so that we could have what is called a new start. And that new start gave us the ability to have funding and authorization for the feasibility study. And we were fortunate at the beginning of the year, like I say, to get that through our work from our congressional delegation. The other question I get is, well, okay, it's 5 years again afterwards, the same part of the question, but is it going to take a long time for the Corps to catch up? It's a question that's presented to me. And the answer is no. And the reason being is the Joint Board and the Corps has been working hand in hand throughout the development of the Mouse River Enhanced Flood Protection Project so that we all know where we're at, where we're going, how it's working out. It's been a lot of communications there. So we're very much up to speed, as well as we've had 2 PERs we've been able to give to them for a lot of engineering background. We did what was called a reconnaissance study, which back in the day used to be the precursor to the feasibility study. And so there's a lot of information they gained from there. So there's a lot of steps already been taken, and it's positive steps. So I would very much encourage everyone this evening to listen very sincerely to the Corps' presentation and give us your best input you can on things we can do to involve the federal government in our project. So I gave a very high overview on a lot of the other topics. If you want to discuss any of the other topics after the meeting, you can certainly talk to myself. You can talk to my project administrator, Ryan Ackerman. You can talk to another Joint Board member, Dan Jonason. You can talk to Cindy Hemphill after the meeting if you have a question for her. So that being said, I'll turn it back over to Kevin. Thanks.
Yes, put this right here. Sounds real good. Excellent. Okay, thank you so much, Dave. And as Dave mentioned, we've got a lot of things working all together in concert. Tonight we're going to focus on the new Corps of Engineers study. So when you entered, there was a couple of sheets of paper that were given to you, the white couple sheets as well as the green one. We want to use these as our primary focus tonight during the presentation. This is kind of going to be the backbone that you can take with you, kind of a study guide, if you will, that you can use after the meeting's over, if you want to talk to your neighbors, your friends, others that might not have been able to be here tonight. This is the same packet and the exact same slideshow that we've had the other 2 nights as well. So there's nothing that's been changed whatsoever. So the material is all exactly the same. The primary purpose for our meeting tonight is the green sheet of paper. The green sheet of paper is what we're using for our scoping, and we want to know what it is that you know, what you think we should know as we move forward. And in our presentation, we'll talk more about it. After the presentation, I'll mention this again. But keep this in mind as we go through the evening and jot down the things that you might see as being helpful. And we'll have some reminders and a few bullets on the slide of things that we already know. But we do want to make sure that the primary focus of tonight's meeting is so that you understand that this green sheet is the piece that we want to have the most information on. After the presentation, we're going to close the formal part of the meeting and allow you then to use all the resources in the room. We've got several folks from the Corps of Engineers that have shirts like mine. Anyone with this logo is from the Corps of Engineers. Consider them a resource to help you answer any questions you might have about the feasibility study itself. And as Dave mentioned, there's other folks here that can help you if you have questions about any of the other projects that are in the parallel paths going on. So we've got about a 30-minute presentation for you. And with that said, I'll switch the slide here and turn it over to Craig Evans, our project manager. Thank you. Let's see. All right, very good. I'll turn it over to Craig then.
There we go. Okay. So we're here to talk about the Souris River Feasibility NEPA scoping meetings, and I'll explain what NEPA scoping is all about. So for this evening, Kevin already laid out the agenda. I'll move on. What we're here for is twofold tonight. We're here to explain what we're doing and the process that we use, and the most important part is for us to hear from you. So it's a two-way conversation tonight. Primarily, you will communicate with us through the green sheets and the written comments that you give to us based on what we're presenting to you. But definitely the purpose of the meeting is to get your input. And we do this to comply with the National Environmental Policy Act. When we're preparing an environmental impact statement, the first phase that we have to go through is scoping. And there's definitely a public scoping process that we are obligated to follow. So these meetings that we're having are part of that NEPA process that we need to meet in doing the study. So what kind of input are we looking for? We want to hear from you. What is the scope of our study, what it should include? What things are important to you? What issues are significant to you regarding flood risk management and the river and the water resource in the Souris River Basin? What are your ideas about alternatives that we might consider? And what sorts of impacts? If we were to take a certain action, what would that do? And would you be concerned about impacts that that project might cause? So all of that is stuff that we can study, but we might not think about it unless you tell us that it's a concern for you. So that's the whole purpose of tonight is to prime your thinking so you can start giving us information that will help us get through the study. So this is the map of the basin. You can see that, more than half of it is in Canada. We are going to be focusing mainly on the U.S. portion of the basin because that's where the Corps of Engineers can work. Although we are very much involved in the coordination with Canada and working through the International Souris River Board to have that conversation with Canada and regarding how the dams up there are operated and all of that. We're part of that conversation, but that is separate from the feasibility study that we're doing right now. This is a partnership, as David mentioned. It's a partnership between the Army Corps of Engineers and the Souris River Joint Water Resource Board. We share the cost 50-50, and we expect the study will cost about $3 million total and take 3 years. So we signed our cost-sharing agreement in May of 2016, and so we expect to be done around May of 2019. When the Corps of Engineers comes into a study like this, we have two primary goals. The goals of any water resource project the Corps would do are to increase national economic development, so there's an economic piece, and then protecting the environment is another thing. The guidance that we have is to contribute to the national economy consistent with protecting the environment. So we have to do both. The purpose of our study itself is to identify what the water resource problems are in the whole basin, formulate possible solutions, think about what we could do to solve those problems. Then once we have a range of possible solutions, we evaluate the economics and the environmental impacts of those and compare them and try to determine if there's anything that the federal government can support. And the two factors that we have to look at are the benefits and the impacts. So in order for us to recommend a project, the benefits have to be greater than the costs. So in terms of a flood risk management project, that's typically economic benefits, damages prevented, and then compared to the cost of building the project. But we can also do things for the environment where we're looking at habitat benefits that are not so quantifiable in terms of dollars. So without going into great detail how we do that, the point is that we have to conclude that the benefits of the project outweigh the cost. And then any impacts that we have to the environment have to be mitigated, and they have to be ultimately deemed acceptable in order for us to proceed. So those are the two hurdles we have to get over, and we already know that economic justification is often a hard hurdle to get over. So, but that's for us to get more information about as we develop the study, and we'll see how that shakes out. What we're shooting for is a congressional authorization for a project, a federal project. And then once the project would be authorized, we would have to go back through the appropriations process to get funding in order to design and build the project. So first we need to get authorization, and the feasibility study provides Congress with the information they need to authorize a project. And then following that, we compete with the rest of the nation's projects for funding. David also, he already explained about parallel efforts and the Mouse River Enhanced Flood Protection Project. It has a basin-wide emphasis, and it is aimed at handling a flood event equivalent to the 2011 flood. So basically the flood of record. The Corps of Engineers has been involved in that effort, but we're wearing a different hat than we're wearing with the feasibility study. With the Mouse River Enhanced Flood Protection Project, or the Mouse River Plan, the Corps has two hats. One is our regulatory hat, where we're dealing with the Clean Water Act and fill in wetlands and the things that we typically are regulatory issues for our office in Omaha. They have folks in Bismarck who administer that. But then also the Corps in St. Paul District gets involved anytime someone wants to modify an existing federal project that's within our geographic area. So we have two different Corps offices involved in this Mouse River Plan for two different reasons, and that's a different focus than trying to determine what federal investment we can make. So I know this is confusing for people, and we've got an EIS underway for the Mouse River Plan that is dealing with the impacts of what that plan would produce. Now this EIS is a little bit different. It's what would be the impact of a federal project that we don't even know what that project looks like yet. So we're at the very beginning of our process. The other parallel effort that David mentioned was this International Souris River Plan of Study, dealing with the Canadian dams and the agreement between Canada and the U.S. about how those dams are operated. We expect that study to start, as David said, about a year from now. It will probably take about 2.5 years to complete. And like I said, we are plugged into that as well through the International Souris River Board. So this core planning process is a generic process we use across the country in all of our feasibility studies, and it has a number of phases. Right now we're in the scoping phase, the very beginning, where we try to get our arms around, well, what are all the problems, what should our objectives be, what are alternatives that would help us solve the problems, what kind of constraints do we have, all of those issues we're trying to deal with in scoping so that we can decide how we're going to spend the money that we have over the rest of the process. So the next phase, the alternative formulation phase, we will, in January, we'll be at that alternatives milestone number 1. That's in January of 2017, where we go up through the Corps of Engineers and get blessed to continue with the process. But so between 1 and 2, we're taking all of the alternatives and all the problems and everything that we've learned during scoping and narrowing down so that at the end of that phase, when we get to milestone number 2, we will have one plan that we think is what the federal government could do. And we'll write that plan up and describe how we got there. That'll be in a draft environmental impact statement. And between milestones 2 and 3 is where our public review of that draft environmental impact statement happens. And we're expecting that'll be about a year from now. So milestone 2 will be in August of 2017. And so after August, probably late September, October, is when we'll be out here with a draft document that you can give comments to and tell us what you think about where our study led us. So at milestone 3, we take the work that we did in the alternative phase, all the comments that we get during the public involvement and the public review, and we decide, yep, that is the path we're going to pursue. And then the rest of the study is all focused on just the one plan that we're going to recommend. So that takes roughly half of the time and a good chunk of the money that we have is to go through that feasibility level analysis. And then the chief's report is the administrative processing at the very end, getting that report finalized and endorsed and sent to Congress. So that's the phase in a nutshell. But the two things to remember about this slide is right now we're scoping. We need your input now, and you'll get another chance to comment between milestones 2 and 3. So this slide is presenting basically the same information that's in the handout. It's the details with the dates. And these are all tentative dates right now, but basically that's what we're doing between the milestones. And like I say, that's in your handout. So looking at the Souris River Basin map, you can see up in Canada, the red squares are the dams that we have an agreement with Canada how those will be operated. The United States has purchased flood storage in those reservoirs, and the Canadians have been operating those dams in accordance with the agreements that we have established when they were built. So that's one reach of the study, is up in Canada. Then when we cross the border, we have another reach down to, including Mouse River Park and down to Lake Darling. Lake Darling has its own problems and opportunities. And then from Lake Darling to where the Des Lacs comes in is another reach. The Des Lacs River Basin is part of the study. So we work our way downriver, and each separate reach has its own problems, and we know that they're different. The problems in the upper part of the basin are a little bit different than the problems in the lower part. The refuges have their own issues. City of Minot and the area between Burlington and Minot have, somewhat different concerns. So we're trying to capture all of those different problems and understand the full picture of what's going on in the basin. But as you know from living here, it's a very complicated system. So we're not going to be able to have one magic bullet that solves everybody's problem. So these are the reaches. that we're looking at, and there's nothing magical about this, it's just kind of how we broke it up. But when you're commenting, please let us know which reach of the river you're commenting about, or give us a location on the river so that we can really know where your comment applies and how it fits in with the larger basin. So starting out, the first part of our planning process is always to look at the problems and opportunities. And what is it that's a problem out here? Well, we know that flooding is a problem for sure. And we know there are a couple different types of flooding that are affecting people. We have the peak flood stages like you experienced in 2011 in Minot and everywhere through the basin. There's a high water, it gets structures, it gets whatever's on the landscape. That's one type of flooding that we can do something. We can do something to reduce the peak or past the peak. But we also know that in the lower part of the river, the downstream area where the gradient flattens out and the river is less of a channelized stream and more of a wide open area, that extended flows that don't allow the floodwater to drain back into the river, those are problems in that part of the basin that are a little bit different. The solutions are likely to be different. So anyway, there's the two different types of flooding that we're kind of dealing with. In terms of what gets damaged, we know that there's the urban areas, the rural areas, all the development in those areas, the agricultural land itself and what's growing there, and then the refuges. The wildlife refuges get damages that are different than those other areas. The flip side of the coin for flooding is drought. And drought is really the reason why the Canadian dams were built in the first place and why Lake Darling is where it is. It's to provide water supply for, Lake Darling is for the reservoir, and the Canadian dams are also for water supply. So trying to manage both floods and droughts with the same dams and the same facilities is a very tricky thing, and that's why it's not easy. You know, it's not an easy solution to just say, well, drain the dams. That'd be nice, but the reason they're there is for water supply. So we have to balance all that too. Thinking in a more positive light, we also think about opportunities, not just problems that are things that need to be fixed, but opportunities are things that maybe could be made better. We might or might not frame something as a problem, but it could still be, you know, that there would be good things we could do. And ecosystem restoration and recreation are two things that the Corps of Engineers has authority to do, especially in conjunction with flood risk management. So talking with some folks here tonight and the other meetings that we had, we know that those cutoff channels or the dead loops in town and up at Mouse River Park, there's room for improvement, let's say. And so that's something that we can look at. We also, as long as we're going to be doing things in the river channel potentially, we can do things to boost the habitat there and improve fish passage, get fish to more spawning areas and things like that. In terms of recreation, usually we can add trails to flood risk projects. If we have a levee, we can put a trail on the top as long as we can show the economic justification of that. Things like greenways and trails, we can do those things in conjunction with ecosystem restoration. So there's a lot of potential things that the Corps of Engineers can do if we can show that they're justified to do. And that's what we hope to do with this feasibility study, is look at those kind of opportunities. So when we talk about objectives and constraints, we're getting more specific. We know flood risk and flood damage is a problem, but what is our objective? How are we going to reduce flood risk and damage? What specific places do we want that to happen? What levels of flood risk management are going to be our targets? That's what we need your help to define. What should be the objectives of this study? We know we're going to try to reduce flood risk and flood damage, and we're going to try to restore ecosystems, but we need to get specifics. And you all live out here, you know what the specific problems are and what the objectives should be. Constraints are things that limit the alternatives that we might look at, or limit the things we can do. So one of the constraints that we have is that we have the National Wildlife Refuges in the basin. Those are also federal facilities. Congress is not going to be excited about doing things to them that are not compatible with their mission. So we're working very closely with the Fish and Wildlife Service to understand what the refuges are there for and what they need to do, and making sure that anything we propose would be compatible with the refuges. The other big constraint that we are very much aware of is the international border and the treaty obligations that we have with the Canadians. So those are two big constraints. But what other things are there that you're aware of that we should be considering that might limit the alternatives or limit the impacts that we can have with a project? We're asking. That's why we're here. You tell us. So in terms of alternatives, we know that many, many years we've been working on things. The Joint Board has been working on things. There are a lot of alternatives that have been considered. This is a small list, but what I want to highlight here is no action is always the base condition. No action is what happens if we don't do anything. And that's the condition that we compare all of the other alternatives to when we're defining what the benefits of doing something are. It's always the benefit compared to not doing anything. The next step up in actually doing something would be operating what we already have in a different manner. So we will be looking at Lake Darling, which is something that we have some control over. We'll be looking at what ways could we operate that differently that might make sense and provide benefits. Beyond that, then we start getting into things that we could build, or modifying dams, bridges, building new dams, building new levees. That would be along the line of what the Mouse River Plan is doing, and we'll definitely be considering all of the features that are in the Mouse River Plan. So these are just examples of things that have come up in other reports that we'll take another look at. We also, the Corps of Engineers is obligated to look at non-structural projects. Non-structural projects are things that really move structures and people away from the water instead of building a structure to keep the water away from what it is you're trying to protect. So things like raising structures along the coast, you see buildings on stilts. I don't think we're really talking about putting buildings on stilts in the Souris River Basin, but we can do things with raising structures. We can build ring levees around structures and farmsteads. We can relocate structures out of the floodplain, and that's something that is already being implemented through the STAR program, locally funded and through the state. So these are not things that are foreign to the Souris River Basin. There's stuff that we have examples of, and we will definitely look at those types of things. When the Corps does look at relocating structures out of the floodplain in places where it makes sense to do that, if we can clear the area and then go in and restore that ecosystem and potentially add trails and things through there, we can count all of those benefits toward justifying the project. So in addition to getting the flood benefits, we use these other types of benefits to actually justify and get support for federal funding for those types of alternatives. So we're definitely going to be looking at that as one tool that might apply in certain locations. And then greenways, I know there's an effort locally to improve the area adjacent to the rivers and kind of open up some of that area for more green space. But what other alternatives are there? If you have an idea that you think would be a really good thing for us to look at, write it down and let us know, because we may not be as creative as you are. We need your thoughts on what you think would work to solve the problems. The kind of the last thing, or I should see what the next slide is, but another thing we look at is the significant impacts and effects of whatever it is we would do. So anything we build is going to have environmental effects. We want to know what resources are important to you. What particular spots do you think are sensitive or that would be affected by if we were to change Lake Darling Dam, or if we were to build a levee someplace? What impacts would concern you enough that we should spend some time and write about them in our report? Economic impacts, things like if we were to change flood levels downstream of a project or upstream, what are we inducing in terms of economic impacts on people that are maybe not benefited? We need to know that too. So let us know what your concerns are, and if you already can see that an alternative we're considering would affect you in some way, we need to hear about it so we can investigate that. So since we're here primarily to get your data, these are the types of comments that would be most helpful. If you could focus on the resources that are potentially affected, what the effects or impacts could be to those resources, what are the problems and opportunities, are we focused on the right thing or should we be focused on something else? More specifically, what are the objectives and constraints that you would like us to consider? And what are the alternatives that we should look at? So that's kind of where we're at. We're right at the beginning. We want to get your thoughts on where we should go with this study. And really, what are we missing? So with that, I'll turn it back to Kevin.
Okay. Thank you, Craig. So that was about a half-hour summary of what the Corps has begun. Obviously, it's working in tandem with all the other efforts, and we want to make sure that we're in concert totally. As we go forward tonight, looking back at the white sheet of paper, the very back side of it, again, has the timeline of how we're going to proceed. Craig mentioned we'll be coming back looking for your comments on our draft report sometime next summer. And then also in the very middle of the back page, that does show our website address. The URL is listed there. If you'd like to pull up any of the documentation that the Corps of Engineers is working on, we'll be posting to that all the time, so that will be kind of our working document library. So use that as a resource if you want to do a little more research. And then on the bottom of the page, we've got contacts not only of the Corps of Engineers, but then also other study partners. Their address as well as email is listed. So if you have questions of other people other than the Corps of Engineers, we've provided that for you as well. So keep the white packet. That's very important moving forward. And then as Craig mentioned, the green sheet here is the real purpose why we're here tonight. As part of our EIS, we're required to make sure that we ask specifically for comments. And so with this, we are asking you, if you have comments for us on any of those things that Craig had showed, the key is to either write them on this sheet of paper. If you've got them typed up on a different piece of paper, that's fine. Leave that with us as well. We do have a spot here for a name. You do not have to have that filled out at all to have your comments considered. All comments are considered equally. And actually, if you do put your name in here, It would be subject to the Freedom of Information Act. If somebody were to ask for that by request, any names that are given on here would have to be given to anybody that asks for that. So if you're sensitive to that, do not want your name available to anybody that would ask for those types of things, do not include it with this type of a paper. If you mail something in and have a return address, that wouldn't be part of a request of that, but if it's written on this paper with your comment, that would make it formal, okay? So I just want to make sure you're clear on that if you're sensitive to those things. And then in the black box is the most important part. Any comments that you have need to be us roughly by November the 11th. We're not firm on that date. If it comes in a day or two later, that would be fine. Obviously, we're going to do what we can to consider all comments, because we do want to hear everything that you have for us. Those can be emailed to us or hard mailed to us, that's fine. If you do have it filled out, if you had some thoughts together and you want to fill that out now, this would be a great time to get a start on it, and you can leave it with us at the back door on your way out. As I mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, the resources here in the room are going to stay. We'll stay here as long as people are willing to talk to us and look at the different pieces of information we have. We've got a computer set up in the back. We can look at anything that you're looking for on some of the other efforts, as well as we've got posters on the wall that do show some detail. And what we'll do at the close of the meeting here is we'll allow anybody to track any of us core folks down or other people from the community that are working on the other efforts, and try to answer any individual questions you might have. So with that, I thank you for your patience and have safe travel home, and we'll be here for a period of time until we've had a chance to talk to everyone. Thank you.